All right, hello. Let's kick this off then. Thanks to people who have tuned in for the first Lenker webinar in a ongoing monthly series that we're going to be kicking off today on marketing topics. The first one here being what is brand storytelling. So I will hand this over to Lenker Consulting's founder, John Lenker, who's here with us today, along with Kevin de la Plante, and he can ease us into this thing.
So with that, welcome everyone. Branding, as was just mentioned, is such an important thing. It's a moving target, and so much of what we do with branding comes from either what we've learned out in the ecosystem or what we've kind of internalized and personalized. And for me, I've kind of done the latter. I've internalized and personalized what branding means to me, and the most important thing that I can say about my feeling about branding here as we start is that I don't look at my brand or my personal brand or our company's brand as a complete reflection of everything that is in place right now here perfectly 100%. The brand is that. It is based on the history and the credibility and the track record and all those things. But as it's communicating the value proposition, I always want to set it up as a goal, as a target, as something that is guiding the striving of the business or my own personal striving. I'm aiming at this set of ideals. And so, with that set of ideals, there's an unfoldment, there's a storytelling process. And I got to be honest, I haven't met anybody who understands this topic better than Kevin de la Plante. If any of you have been so fortunate as to have gone through any of his content or material or training, you know that he approaches everything in such a comprehensive, thoughtful way. And I, as much as anybody, am really looking forward to hearing Kevin's presentation. Kevin is the former head of the Philosophy and Religious Studies Department at Iowa State University, internationally known expert in critical thinking and argumentation and persuasion. And he has been with Lenker full-time as a partner since 2020. And with that, Kevin, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
What a great intro, John. Thank you. It's one of the joys of working at Lenker that the company gets to indulge my nerdy obsessions. In this case, storytelling. So, thought of myself as a writer, starting out of the gate and now getting interested in persuasive communication generally. And storytelling is right up there as like the pinnacle of persuasive communication. But my gosh, the writing and the marketplace for instructional content around storytelling is a confusing mess. So I kind of, became really intrigued by this when I wanted to learn more myself. And all of a sudden you see that there's this expansive approaches and it's a very new, there's a lot of energy in the space right now, which I will talk about. Anyway, this is the plan for what I want to walk through today. I want to talk about storytelling in branding and marketing and why anyone in business should care about it. And I want to talk about what it means to do brand storytelling in the current digital media environment where, as I said in the promo stuff, the customer controls the journey now. We don't do that anymore. The customer does. And that imposes some new challenges when you're trying to communicate your brand message. So my goal is that at the end of all this, we're going to all have a better understanding what's actually involved in building and communicating a story-driven brand. So let's start here. Boom. Now, one of the things you notice when you start looking at storytelling for business online or in Amazon or whatnot is there's a small cottage industry around advising and consulting on this. Oops. That click off on me.
Yes, we have a blank screen. There you go.
Sorry, I don't know why that happened. Okay. Yeah. So, and I happen to be like a bibliophile. So for work stuff, I collect Kindle books. I can't afford the paperbacks anymore or the storage, but Kindle indulges my my obsession, my bibliophilia that comes out of academia. So I had these books, and it is all the rage right now. Story or Die, The Storytelling Edge, Creating Signature Stories, Storynomics. And some of these are written by really famous story structure gurus in Hollywood and writing and so forth. And they're moving into the marketing and business space. Here's another set. Story thinking, stories in the brain, the science of storytelling, brand stories. Start with the story, and on and on. Now, I do think that reading any one of these books or any of the many hundreds of articles that are out there on the topic will give you, some sense of why people think that story is important for persuasive communication. But if you read a bunch of these books together, then it starts to look confusing because they don't all say the same things, or they don't care about the same things. So one of my goals is to help in the outset is to paint a picture of this landscape. So, but we'll start here. Why is story so valuable for branding and marketing? Well, for one reason, it's just no question that stories are powerful. Our ability to participate in and be absorbed by a shared story, like we're seeing here in this movie theater, it really is quite remarkable. And we can have this experience in so many different modes, like when you're reading a book, where you've got static words and images, and they activate our imaginations, and we're transported into this different reality where there are characters that are experiencing conflicts and struggles, and we care about what happens to them. And when those stories have an impact on us, we remember them. We remember them better than we remember anything else. So that's interesting. And we, each of us ourselves have this ability to create stories. We're not just consumers of them, we can create them and share them with others. So, and it's an ancient human ability. It might be the most fundamental form of distinctively human communication that we're only now starting to really understand how our brains do it, how we do this, because it's quite striking. So, one reason for the recent interest in storytelling is that the neuroscience of storytelling has just taken off in the past 15 years. How stories change the brain, how stories in the brain stimulate neurotransmitters like dopamine and cortisol and oxytocin. How the brains of people, when they're sharing a story or listening to a story, get synced up, and they light up across all these different brain regions. Neural coupling. If you Google brains and storytelling, and you get pages and pages of hits, how story and so forth, like this here. So it's clearly, something's going on. Now, from a branding and marketing perspective, they're obviously valuable on two fronts. One is, one of the goals of branding is to get audiences to remember who you are, and another goal is to build meaningful connection with an audience between you and your brand. So by their nature, stories are memorable and stories are meaningful. So it's sort of built in, right? So these two align with these sets of goals: brand recognition, brand awareness, which is about being memorable; brand affinity, brand loyalty, which is about the connection you have with your audience. Now, I think it's helpful to sort of place storytelling within the context of this other ways of presenting information, to look how stories compare, and you can see how distinctive it is. So, and here I just want to look at, ways in, facts and their memorability, how easy it is to remember something. So on a scale of like hard to remember to easy to remember, the hardest to remember are just unrelated sets of facts or events, right? Here's A, here's B, here's C. There's no connection between them. Now, if you put those events into a sequence with a temporal, impose a framing where there's a temporal ordering of some kind, then they're actually a bit easier to remember. This came before this came after this. Brains want to sequence things. And it becomes even easier still if you put those events in a sequence with a causal logic that ties them together. So A happened, and that caused B to happen, but C happened, therefore D had to happen, so on. You frame things in that way. This is actually a much more memorable sequence. It's easier to remember what events happened here. And also, it turns out, just as a side issue, we're more likely to think that the sequence of events is true and more plausible simply because they're tied together with causal logic. That is, the causal logic is so fluent in our brain. It's the language, the operating system of our brains that it actually elevates the plausibility of the information that we get when it's framed in this way. But this isn't story yet. Here you have something like narrative. You could have something like process. And but you don't have story yet because you don't have characters yet. Yeah. None of these hold a candle to story as a device for creating memorability. With the story, what you're doing is you're following the events that happen to a character and the character's response to those events. So, and what we're tracking here when we're engaged with the story is what happens to the character. Is it good or bad for them? Are they better off or are they worse off? And so I have this sort of scale here where there's a plus and a minus, where there's like a positive and negative valence to it. It could be happy, unhappy. It could be doing well, doing poorly. And with the emojis here, you have a sense like this is what we're tracking with the story. And it's the changes in these, in the polarity of the experiences between positive to negative that are actually the moments, they define the moments of drama that we pay attention to, that we remember. This kind of picture, it really is what's distinctive about the experience of story, I think. Here's one version of a definition that leans on this. It's a dynamic escalation of conflict-driven events that cause meaningful change in a character's life. Now, when you frame it this way, the key here to focus on is that our engagement with stories isn't based on their ability to communicate facts about the world or events about the world. It's based on this other cognitive ability. It's on our ability to imagine what's happening in the mind, in the experience of some protagonist or other characters in the story. And crucially, it's about this ability to identify with those experiences, to empathize with those characters. So you feel and experience in some sense what they're feeling and experiencing. That's the distinctive human capability that we're exercising when we're engaging in story. And another aspect that's important to understand here is that there's different ways in which we can care about what happens to a character. It's not just whether they're happy or sad. So the plus minus isn't just, happy or sad. It's, are they doing well or poorly with respect to some kind of value? Lots of different kinds of values come into play, and a well-structured story was going to have some kind of core value. It helps to anchor what the story is about. It's about success or failure. It's a love or hate, truth, lies, self-discovery, self-deception. The answer to that tells us whether we're talking about like a tragedy or a comedy, or it's an action tale, is it a mystery tale, a tearjerker, or whatever. This way of picturing, of talking about stories in terms of shapes was actually popularized by the author Kurt Vonnegut. He calls this the man in the hole story because of the shape. Things start out okay for the character, something bad happens to the character, and then we watch them struggle to get out of the hole. There's other story arcs that have been defined in terms of shapes: rags to riches, riches to rags. Here's the man in the hole, Icarus story, Cinderella story, and so on. And note that the plus and positive and negative here is about this some kind of valence, right? About what's happening to the character. This is actually from some analysis of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where you're tracking the mental state of the main characters over the course of the book. And what's engaging here is that these reversals from positive to negative, that's where the main plot points are. That's where the milestones are. It's where meaningful change happens that the characters have to respond to. And that's the parts that we remember mostly. And we respond to this too, just as once we're hooked in, if we're like, the girl who was reading the book and she's absorbed in the story, your brains get synced up to, well, in this case, it's not a brain. If you were talking to a person, your brain gets sort of synced up to the person telling the story. If you're in a room, they have these experiments around this room where a story is being laid, you can monitor people's brain states, and there is a kind of syncing that happens in the brains of people who are sharing, entertaining, a shared story. And here, it's something like you're simulating the experience, the mind of a character in your head, and you're identifying with that in kind of the way that we do when we can share stories and identify with each other's, empathetically. It is a kind of miracle that we can do this. I think we really take this for granted. It strikes me. The more I think about it, the more I think, wow. Just FYI aside, if you're interested in this topic of neural coupling and what your brain is doing on story, then there's a nice TED Talk here by Yuri Hassan from 2016. It's on YouTube. You can search for it. So just to recap so far, we've talked about storytelling, why it's such a hot topic today in branding and marketing. We talked about what makes stories different from other kinds of narratives or sequences. So now I want to move on and talk about storytelling in business contexts, because it's going to be different from storytelling in fiction, and make a comment about the popularity of Super Bowl ads. So what's the difference between storytelling for fiction in general and storytelling for business? Well, for starters, the form, the length matters, right? Storytelling for fiction, you can have long form and short form. For business, like an ad or marketing copy or a video, it's going to be short form. You don't have 500 pages of a novel or 2 hours in a movie to develop a sort of complex story dynamic. It's got to be a simpler and more compressed kind of story. There's also a difference in the main goal of the storytelling. So when I'm reading fiction, the author of the story doesn't have, their only obligation to me as a reader is to sort of complete the storytelling experience in a satisfying way, however they intended. But if I'm the author of a storytelling, of a purpose-driven story for a business context, like a branding or marketing story, my goal is to actually have the impact of the story extend beyond the period in which you're engaging in the story itself. The goal is to modify your behavior, impact your behavior in the real world in a way that has impact on, frankly, your buying behavior. You kind of want your brand storytelling to follow the person around even after they've seen your video or read your text or whatever, so that when you find yourself in a buying context, you're now somehow differently disposed toward the brand and the choices, so that it makes a difference to your behavior. That's the goal, right? If it didn't make a difference to the behaviors of target audiences, then why bother? So this requirement does put some constraints on the style and the structure of this kind of brand storytelling. You do have to work at drawing associations between your storytelling character elements and your brand so that it does not obscure who the association is intended for. Got a comment about Super Bowl ads in this context. Probably the most iconic version when people think about brand storytelling, and they're not in the business, they're not brand strategists, they often think, oh, it's like those ads, right? Those great, like Betty White Snickers ad or whatnot, or the famous Apple 1984 ad, as iconic examples of brand storytelling. And I think the popularity of these ads has helped to create awareness of the power of creative brand storytelling. They're great case studies. You can often learn so much from them. But I think they've had the effect, I think, of creating an impression that this is what brand storytelling should look like. Expensive, short form videos that are humorous or emotional or inspirational, that make an impact. Because these are great, but brand storytelling has to be much more than this. Ideally, it has to infuse every part of your brand identity and the brand experience. And so holding these up as the exemplars of brand storytelling is, I think, can create a distorted impression amongst the audience. I think I kind of want to play one of these because it can, and because when you think about the way that a character, actually, let you guys pick one. Who wants to watch one? Which of these do you want to watch? And we'll watch it. I think it's probably only time for one.
I don't think I've seen the Alexa one.
Sure. You can watch that one. That was from this year's Super Bowl. And I'm going to play right here, actually. Oh wow. It makes them all play.
Hey babe, check this out. Alexa, it's game day.
Streaming football on Prime Video, closing blinds, chilling rosé.
Rosé?
Well, it's an afternoon game.
It's like she can read your mind. Your mind. I love that we get to sleep in.
Ordering fresh mint mouthwash. Extra strength.
I was thinking I should get a spray can, you know, because it's on Wednesday.
Activating blender.
Funeral's on Monday.
What about the gold, Papa? Can't you see that treasure all along? It was you.
Love the eye patch. When does the show open?
March 8th.
Setting reminder to fake your own death on March 8th.
What the?
When you have to do those love scenes with hot guys, is that fun or is that like the worst?
It's the worst.
Tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies.
Scarlett, this bread is delicious. Did you make it?
Yes, it's from my Gammy's recipe.
Announcement. Gammy is short for she bought it at Whole Foods. Announcement. Colin left the oysters in the car for 5 hours.
It's probably better Alexa can't read your mind.
Bad idea.
What's the game?
Well, that's fun, right?
That last part did make me laugh out loud about the oysters.
Good. So it's fun, right? So what's the strategy that you see here? I'm going, John, I can ask you, but hey, anybody, like, if a brand is if the brand thing is about its storytelling is about having characters, there are characters, things happen to them that we, in this case, we enjoy there, and then so. What's the strategy behind it as a brand storytelling video?
Well, I would offer that they're using humor to kind of lift the mood around the products, and probably that they're also addressing the main concern around voice technology such as Alexa, which is that they're overreaching. So the ultimate takeaway from that is that don't worry, we're not actually.
That's a good point. I mean, that's sometimes ultimately branding is about helping project a value proposition and helping it be relatable and something that people can put their trust in. And rather than sounding defensive, putting out an ad that says, we are not crossing the line, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, that people are worried about out there in the popular culture. Owning it, facing it head on, and making it funny, while reinforcing the basic idea that Amazon is a brand you can trust, and we understand the line that we shouldn't cross, and you can rely on us to not do that. So, to me, that comes through pretty clearly.
Mm-hmm. It also draws attention to a feature set of Alexa, which is that it is trained to anticipate your needs. You teach it and it learns about your preferences and so it is, the mind reading thing is a phenomenon that people have mentioned who use it. Oh my gosh, Alexa knows when I'm out of toilet paper. Alexa knows about the song that I'm about to ask for. So it does have that spookiness about it. It's both an attractive feature, like it's powerful personalization, someone who can read your mind, but it has a scary element to it, undertone. So the humor undercuts the scary parts. As John was saying, it sort of confronts the scariness and kind of diffuses it, while also highlighting the very feature that it makes it extraordinary. It's predictive ability that seems uncanny at times, right? It's clever. Anywho, I have like seven of these videos, but we don't have time to watch them. They're all instructive, right? About how this works. But you know, the talking point at the end where it was that brand storytelling can't be relegated to fun 3-minute or minute and a half videos. That because you could, if you had that video on a lousy website that otherwise didn't do any work for you, then that's not good brand storytelling. So in a modern digital economy, your brand presence is going to have to extend across an entire ecosystem. Website, search engine, social media, influencer marketing, publicity, paid advertising. So brand storytelling is so powerful, then we want it to be diffused throughout this whole ecosystem. This is actually the goal. So in terms of our topic lists, we've unpacked the first point. What's brand storytelling? Why is it important? And now we're moving into the complications, the challenges of brand storytelling in this digital age. So I want to follow up on that. And this is a big eye opener too. So here's the traditional picture of a marketing funnel, the buyer's journey. First, you create awareness and attention for your product, your service, and then they consider buying. So we engage at that level, at the consideration level. Then farther along, the prospect is actively evaluating his or her options until we finally close on a sale. And it really is a model of the buying cycle that is rooted in the sales and marketing context of the mid-20th century, the 1920s through the 1960s, pre-internet for sure. This picture is closer to the reality of what we experience today in the age of internet and digital economies. It's not linear. Prospect can enter the funnel at any point. They can skip around. They can return to earlier stages, exit, come back. And they're also jumping between different elements of your brand ecosystem, between online search, peer referrals, research resources, online communities, social media, Google, YouTube, Reddit, Facebook groups. That's the buyer's journey now, jumping all around this ecosystem. So this may be a better model for this digital ecosystem that is how the brand messaging is being carried. Is something like Chutes and Ladders, where you can go ahead and jump around and return to earlier stages. But I think it's worse. It's actually more like this. It's not just your digital ecosystem. Your audience is moving into and out of your ecosystem and your competitors' ecosystems, right? And jumping around in all sorts of ways. And everyone has a story to tell, and they're trying to engage your audience in their story. So this really is the challenge of brand storytelling today. It's about how do you control your audience's attention so that they can properly absorb the story that you want to tell in this environment. That's the challenge. That's interesting. Here's a personal example, by the way. I was on a product search for an e-ink tablet, something you write on. It's like a Kindle screen, an ebook reader. You can see it in daylight and so forth. It's a different screen technology than an iPad. It looks and feels like paper. I spent 18 months on my search for this. It was a year and a half. Turned out very little time on the brand product websites. I spent most of my time watching YouTube videos that were produced either by new users who had the product and were walking it through and showing, because that's what I wanted to see, and influencers in this category who were talking about the comparison, the new Supernote versus the book, whatever, this versus this, the Remarkable. I wanted to see that. And I went back and I read articles on this. In fact, I actually did a search history on YouTube. These are all the videos I watched. In fact, they extend down the page. It's just a top snapshot of it. But I watched at different times over the past year and a half. So for me, with this particular product search, much of the brand storytelling that I was absorbing was communicated to me through user testimonials and user walkthroughs and influencer content creators who focus on this space. And of course, I saw digital ads. I saw a ton of them because I was heavily retargeted because of all the watching I was doing. So I saw ad after ad after ad everywhere from all sides. Now, just to tease the outcome, I think I actually did make a purchase, and brand storytelling did play a role in that decision, but maybe I'll share it with you towards the end. I want to jump here down to the design parts, the design and communication parts. We understand what the challenges are now. Now, given these challenges, how should we go about designing and communicating your brand story? So the design part. These last sections should go a little faster, I think, because the key ideas, I think, are pretty straightforward. Well, there's one or two key ideas. For example, how do you design a story-driven brand? The answer is it's the same way you would approach the design of any strategic brand identity. It's nothing special about brand. Any strategic brand design effort is going to do the work for you. So let's unpack what that means. Here's like a summary picture of the elements that compose a strategic brand, as brand strategists would think of it. There's a natural logic here that moves from left to right as you're building this out. But then, as we'll see, you have to have some kind of conception of what the whole thing looks like, even as you're working on these foundations. On the strategy side, we've got these two categories: your internal brand DNA and your brand positioning within your competitive market space. So your brand DNA is where you clarify how you think about yourself as a brand. Who am I? What do I want to be? Why does my brand exist? What ultimate purpose are we serving in the world? What's our vision for the future? What's our mission? What are our values? You need to be clear about all of this. And your positioning is about how you think of yourself in relation to competitors and peers and the alternatives that your audience would turn to if you didn't exist. And this is where you've got to build out your core audience profiles. You have to really understand what your competitors are offering and have to decide on how you're going to stand out within this space. What makes you unique and memorable within this comparison set? That's foundational thinking work. We split these up, but conceptually, really, you can't build the one without thinking of the other. You just can't do it. And by the way, notice that in this positioning bucket here, the category of audience. Understanding audience is really critical for any form of persuasive marketing and branding. This is where you have to understand, your target's audience, your target audience's reality, the current reality. What's their backstory? What are their goals, near term, long term? What are their pains and obstacles? What are their values and motivators? And what's the action that you want them to perform? You have to know all this. And in fact, typically in brand storytelling lingo, this core target audience will be, it's the protagonist of the brand story. It's the your protagonist of your story is the stand-in for this target audience. So you're actually doing here is building up the character for this protagonist when you're doing this very traditional marketing and advertising and branding research work, prep work. And then when you start to building out the brand expression, which is how you want to show up in the world, you've got this foundation to ground you. But of course, you can't really separate that, your verbal expression, the visual expression, the character persona you're going to adopt without looking at the stuff beforehand. You're always when you're building this one, you're always looking ahead to how you want to show up in the world for others. But for analysis purposes, it's handy sometimes to distinguish them. Now, notice the slot down here. We have a slot for this for storytelling under the verbal expression category. So in the design of a strategic brand, you need to leave room for storytelling. What does your brand story look like? That should be part of the process. And note that this is now a lot easier, given all the foundational work that you've done. You've already got all the messaging elements that define what your story is about. What is your purpose? What is your vision, your mission, your values? Who is your audience? How do you choose to stand out? What's your personality and your voice? You've got in this section down here, your name, your tagline, your promise, the core messages, the core things that you want your audience to understand about you, to believe about you. If you've got all that, then The story part is really just about the way of telling that story. You've already got the elements all there. So building out a strategic brand is the same as you building out all the elements that would go into building out a story-driven brand. The key then is to add what's the extra special sauce that makes it kind of how do you storify these things, these messages. Now, this is where, if you look at the books and articles about storytelling strategy, it's can be intimidating and confusing because everyone's got their thing. In fact, everyone's trying to sell you something, right? I'll just run through a few of these. Sometimes the complexity of them is like the selling point is like, oh, because it's so obscure and sort of, engaged, then it must be, you need an expert's guidance here, right? Well, Robert McKee is a epic guru, screenplay writing guru to Hollywood stars for decades and decades. He knows about story structure, but, and he's given something. He says 8 stages of story design. And here you've got this identifying the core. What's the story? Subject of the story. It's inciting incident. What's the action? This is the object of desire. There's going to be some structure going back and forth. These oscillations, the crisis points, the conflicts, physical conflicts, social, personal, internal, and so on. Got to understand your target audience, your target needs, your target action. So this is a certain way of sort of conceptualizing storytelling elements. Here's a very different one. This is Lisa Cron's book, Story or Die. And her approach has a much simpler structure that's anchored to these 4 stages. The basic template she calls for persuasive storytelling, the misbelief, the closely held but erroneous belief that your audience enters into. They're misunderstanding something important. The truth, the point that you want to make, how the audience belief isn't actually helping them, it's keeping them from what they want and being who they really are, the realization. And then there's the transformation. To give some example, all kinds of story examples that sort of follow this pattern. Say, okay, that's her approach. Then, of course, you might run into Joseph Campbell, the granddaddy of the hero's journey, archetypal hero's journey, written up in his book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Lots of people go to this well. It's very rich. George Lucas famously appealed to it in his, talking about the structure for Star Wars. And people have taken this and say, well, this isn't so much suitable for branding, but here's a version of it. You'll find this online. The audience's journey, which is a sort of it's a simplified version of the hero's journey, where the audience is the hero. This dude here they have an existing world, an obstacle that they meet, a call to action. They need something in their world. They got to do something in their job. And your brand, here's the yellow guy, shows up as the guide, as the mentor that helps the hero through their journey, overcome the challenge, and help them facilitate the internal transformation that helps them solve the problem, the external problem. They reemerge into the new world with a new approach, a new perspective, a new opportunity, and so on. It's good. It's good. But again, it has a certain kind of, there are different levels of complexity and detail. And this is something I realized as I was going through this, is there's actually different camps within the storytelling consulting community. So if you buy these books, you might find yourself, oh, now I see what's going on. On the one hand, you've got like story structure experts. They come out of fiction, movies, novel writing, and they're experts in that. And they have this deep insight into story structure in the specific media fiction genres. But they often certainly don't address the challenge of storytelling across multiple media or nonlinear customer journeys or anything like that. And when they do talk about applications to marketing and branding, my impression is that they kind of feel forced. It's like trying to fit every marketing and messaging thing into this archetype thing that was designed for movies and fiction, right? Then you've got the story science journalists. They are they focus on brain science, the stuff that's come out of science in the past 10 years, very rich. They bring this great modern understanding to how it is that storytelling works in the brain. and they try to apply that to help us unpack and deepen our ability to do persuasive storytelling. But these guys often then they say sometimes very little about story structure. It's kind of schematic and it's not the priority. They're not trying to be Robert McKee, the story guru. They're trying to help us understand how persuasion science works in the brain and how the mode of storytelling applies. But then, and they don't pay much attention to the diverse needs of marketers. Like if you're writing an email versus writing a headline or a Google ad or something, or a social media post, how is it supposed to help you, right? Then you have this whole other crew. They write books. They're brand strategy experts. David Aker, Donald Miller, Patrick Hanlon. These are main names. They come out of marketing and branding, and they bring this deep insight how storytelling can be applied in branding and positioning and marketing contexts. They often say nothing about story structure. Shockingly, they basically say it's like if you're doing all the mental work of thinking about your customer-centric copywriting, addressing needs, then you've done all the work you need. If you're doing customer-centric, imagining what your customer needs, what's the benefit, what is their goal, what's their pain, what's their gain, and you address that in your content, you are 90% of the way, you're doing more work than most people are. And so they frame brand storytelling kind of broadly. There's all kinds of different kinds of stories you can tell, and so forth, founder stories and customer stories, and which is great, kind of like it really is useful. But then they lean out, they don't say much about classic story structure at all. So the upshot is it's not bad to learn about these, but you really don't need to know how. If you approach this in terms of strategic brand development, then the special sauce can be pretty simple. What I say here is that you want to create content that invites the audience to identify with a character of some kind, implicitly or explicitly. The journey of that character should reflect the inner change that you want to see in your audience that would make them more open to or aligned with your value proposition. Central. If you're not doing that somewhere along the way, you're not doing storytelling for branding and marketing. And then you need to create association somewhere with the use case of your product or your service or your brand so that this interchange is activated in the real world under the right circumstances. So when the audience really has an opportunity, they will think about you in the right context. How do you do that? You can try it out, but these are kind of the minimal requirements for this to be a storytelling exercise. And finally, I want to, this should go a little bit faster here, and I know we're approaching time. What's the communication strategy? How do you, in this complex ecosystem, what's the strategy here? Well, once again, the point I want to say is that it's not a unique challenge. It's just the challenge of communicating any strategic brand. So what does that mean? Well, you've got this foundation for all of your strategic brand, and then the question is, how am I going to create content that is anchored to, that unfolds this brand story? Well, how do you do that? Well, for one thing, you've got something like a messaging platform. The value of a messaging platform is that it pulls together all of the different copy elements that correspond to your strategic brand elements. Your brand purpose, your brand mission, values, the promise, and so forth, your target audience profiles. You have that together. You bring it all into one place, you organize it, you make it accessible to your team. It has all the ingredients to populate a brand story. And then I would recommend you write a kind of paperback version of your brand story. It's a shortish, linear telling of the story. It could go on your website. It could, it doesn't have to, actually. But having done that, it's a place where if you had an audience for the time period that you want, and you were to tell your story shortly, then you would have that's the one that you would tell. Use whatever storytelling framework you're comfortable with, because any storytelling framework will be better than none. Because if you're thinking customer-centrically about a character, identification, that's really all you need. to get the ball, to being better than 90% of the messaging copy out there. Give your target audience something that they can identify with that reflects their needs, goals, and worldview. And then you have that in your head, or your writers do. And then you have to have that in the back of your head when you're going out and producing the email copy or the social media post or whatever. The brand story has to be sort of in the back of your brain so that it informs where you're doing, what you're doing, the next little piece of content. And then the next point, final point, practice smart digital marketing. That's just about making sure that you've got all the pieces of your digital marketing ecosystem are in place, email, copy, and so forth. And I don't have time to go into that. But if you're doing digital marketing well, you already have the infrastructure for sharing and communicating these elements. And John's like, we're out of time.
No, you have time for this slide.
Okay. So how do you communicate? This is a few summary slides. How do you communicate a story brand to your audiences? Key point, it's a natural extension of communicating any strategic brand. B, your story elements should reside in a messaging platform. You want to distinguish here messaging from storytelling. Messaging is what you want your audience to believe or feel about you and what actions you want them to take. Be clear about all that. The storytelling is a way of communicating those elements. You can tease those parts apart. And then practice strategic brand management. Make sure your content that you create draws from the same message sources and is grounded in the strategic brand. If you're doing that, that's just good strategic brand practice. Then you will populate your digital ecosystem with content that has an anchor point, a footprint in a coherent brand identity. And then I guess these other summary points actually help to flesh out the picture. So I'll just run through them. Storytelling, it's a fundamental mode of human communication and the most persuasive mode, I think. There is no single theory or model of storytelling that's best. Story experts that come from different disciplines, they have different priorities. We can learn from all of them. A story-driven brand is a natural extension of a strategic brand. Customer journeys are complex, decentralized, and non-linear. That's a takeaway. Now, to communicate a coherent brand story in this digital ecosystem, one, make sure that you have agreement on all your strategic messaging elements and make it accessible to your teams. That's the messaging platform. Next, create the paperback version of your brand story somewhere on your website. Ideally, you could do this in multiple formats, like a nice brand video, your 3-minute brand video to accompany parallel a brand narrative. Perfect. And you create content that tells parts of that story. You storify the messaging and a content strategy, and then you rotate through your messaging elements in your content strategy as you put it out there. So your social media, your this, your that, your email marketing, and so forth. The little elements are actually telling bits of that story about audiences, about the transformation, about the goal, about the need, about the problem you're solving, about their reality. Telling that story, it's distributed, it's decentralized, it's in chunks. And you sort of have to trust that your audience, as they move into and out of your ecosystem and absorb these parts, they will build up, if it's a consistent experience, a coherent story, they will absorb the brand story. They don't necessarily have to have watched the 3-minute video, all of it, but they will have the picture, the identity in their head, because you've been telling the elements of the story, kind of maybe out of order or whatnot, but then they create that impression. And then finally, give them a reason to come back. Keep coming back, because that means that they will absorb more of your story if they have a reason to return, if you're engaging them, if you're providing value to them. So that gets them coming back. And that's where, over time, the repetition is precisely where you get to get ingrained in their brains and can really do the work of influencing their behavior and their choices.
Wonderful.
Finally, I did buy
this.
I just to tease the point, I did buy this product. The remarkable, it's actually not the most feature rich. It's not, and it's too expensive. And so, but it was it was the market leader. It came out of the gate strong. And the use case for me was that I really wanted something with a lot of drawing abilities. This one has the best. But I'll tell you, I'll just be honest. This guy, I kind of wanted to be this guy. Right? This is on the website. This guy, it's like he's focused on his thing. He's a stylish, kind of distinguished. Like this was a proxy for that I could relate to, kind of aspirational or whatnot. It did the work for me. So I'll have to admit, it put me over the edge. All right, we're done.
I like you more than this guy, for the record.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm just expressing my insecurities. I wish.
But he does have a great
cooler.
outfit. He does have a great outfit.
He does.
Folks, we really appreciate you bearing with us through the technical difficulties. And I want to thank you for joining us. We are at the top of the hour. I understand that not everybody might be able to stay for a Q&A. I am putting into the chat Kevin's email address. And if for some reason you have to leave and you'd like to ask a follow-up question, please feel free to send Kevin an email. But I'm going to hand it back over to Rachel. And for those of you who do want to ask some questions here, maybe we'll leave like 5 minutes to kind of wrap things up. So with that, I give it back to Rachel, and I want to thank you, Kevin, for preparing this presentation. It was very interesting, and I'm sure that all of us have a lot to think about. So with that, Rachel.
Thanks, John.
All right. Well, I know I have a couple of questions as we come up on the hour. Does anybody else here? I think, again, we're a small enough crew that we can dive in and take the time that we need. If not, I can do the diving myself. I don't know how people are feeling. Diving in it is. Actually, one thing that I genuinely am interested to hear from you, Kevin. You premised this as being a non-linear journey in the sense that it used to be more linear. And I wonder what your thoughts are about this being a phenomenon that's changed over time and has a certain flavor nowadays that's specific to kind of like modern day marketing, as opposed to how things used to work. Like, how has brand storytelling evolved in your eyes to get where it is and what you were talking about today?
Well, the history of marketing strategy, came out of, door-to-door sales and consumer product marketing. And, when you do door-to-door sales, you show up on their door and you have this opportunity. You've got to do a little pitch, pick their interest in something. And once you get your foot in the door, and you lead them, the prospect, through a kind of sequence where if you're successful, they'll buy something out of your suitcase, right? And then they'll get stopped. If you're like, say no, then all of a sudden you moved on, they've stopped. And so they had this model of like, for 100 knocks on the door, maybe 30 of them will invite me in. And then from those 30 invite me in, and I'll do a demo. Then out of that, 10 of those will be seriously considering this. And out of that 10, I can close on maybe 70%. So it's like this funnel is like a percentage of each. And that was, so they would track things like, what's your percentage rates? What's your whatever, how do you qualify the leads? The extension of that of course, people realized, oh, well, your business doesn't end at the sale. You've got people, you got to serve the customer after they've got it. You have to have customer service. They could buy from you again. And so, there was the extended funnel of loyalty and customer service, and you repurchasing or extending their the consumer value for you. And then there's like, they could be your brand advocate, your loyalty. They could recommend to their neighbors. So that's where the brand affinity, they were very clear that once you got brand loyalty, that was a powerful tool. So there was lots of talk about that. But I think the focus on storytelling was really dominated by copywriting language. So the psychology around persuasion and influence in copywriting, that goes way back. But the role of having your intentionally telling a story, so they engages the cognitive faculties of storytelling, imagine identification with a character that goes well above for them, and then so forth. That just wasn't really talked about as it has been in the past 20 years or so. Which doesn't mean it wasn't going on, but it wasn't like a category of discussion, really, it seems to me. It was implicit in the practice. The people who were natural storytellers, salespeople have always been natural storytellers, the good salesmen, right? People. So it was implicit in the practice. And it wasn't until people started talking about story structure explicitly, in a popular sense, that all of a sudden marketers saw the application there. And the brain science stuff is all new. So a new audience has entered into the space in the past recent while. The death of the funnel language has been around for 15 years. The death of the marketing funnel because of the internet. It's common sort of slogan. It's the same talking points. So.
Mm-hmm. What do you feel the most important takeaway is here?
I'm not the wrong person to ask. You should ask our guests. The point that's most relevant to your particular interests, as writers or as strategists or as whatnot.
Well, if I may, I mean, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
We can.
You can. Okay, I'm wearing AirPods. I think for me, it's like back to the fundamentals of knowing my audience and really fleshing out who they are and who I want to be to them, because that's something that I've never really sat down and taken the time to do. So I obviously need to go back and do that before I can move forward.
Which character do you play?
Yeah, I don't know. Excellent question.
There's a problem that we have with marketers, is that people think that the product has to appeal to everyone, right? So the customers, anyone can be a customer for this, right? Problem there is though that you don't have a specific audience to market to. Like if your brand is like a person and they have a voice, then you model your brand and their voice based on a single target, frankly. It's like a conversation. How would your brand talk to your ideal target audience if it was just two of them in a room? And that if you model that out, what's the psychology? What are you trying to, what's the persuasive? Then you're unpacking. That's the anchor for the brand messaging strategy, for the voice, for the whatnot. So you do have to find a way to consolidate your audience under, something that stands for it's not, of course, your audience is more diverse than that, but you have to find some way of consolidating it into a singular type of character. And that becomes the one that when you're writing copy, you're writing for, you always want to write copy for an individual. Imagine that. It's always an individual who's reading the copy. Right? So write for the individual. That has to be, your iconic representation of your ideal target is that individual. When you're writing at the high level, if you're actually segmenting your audiences into different, then you're writing for segmented audiences. But at the highest level, there's a singular kind of persona that your audience represents. That's why the exercise of storytelling is a good one in disciplining you to think about who is the protagonist of this story, because it helps you think through who you think your ideal target audience is.
I have a question.
Sure.
all of this sounds great when you have a budget for copywriters and you've got a team of people who can put all of this stuff in place. If you're dealing with a small client with a small budget, what would you focus on first and foremost in order to get that story across? Especially if the client is going to be doing some of that work themselves.
Does anyone else want to address that? John's muted. Rachel, I wonder how you would answer that question now.
Interestingly, a lot of the time with LENKER engagements, we premise our work with like a bit of a exhausting Q&A session to get the clients to think about questions that they aren't actually asking themselves as part of this process. Quite often we pose the question, if your brand were a person, what would they look like? How would they speak? How would they dress? How old are they? It's the type of thing that, some people really engage with that question, some people not so much, but the fact that you're thinking about it is something that isn't a given, isn't an exercise that people go through on a regular basis. Kind of stretches the brain to consider the fact that their company and their product is a brand in and of itself, regardless of whether it's a good one. It has a brand presence. It might be a terrible one, it might be a flat one, but it's there. And so you need to think like, well, actually, how do you see it? How do you personify it? How do you attach emotion to it in this way? And then that will help narrow the lens for how it is that they are viewing the work and how they can then take it from you if you give them, kind of the starting point and say, this is where we go from here. And I can see that John's put his video on, so I think he's excited to follow up on that.
Well, I think fundamentally, we as individuals, whether we're working in our own business on our own or part of a smaller team, doesn't necessarily have the resources to, bring an entire massive effort around branding and brand storytelling. I think the first thing that we need to do, even on a team of one, is recognize that we have the responsibility to make ourselves relatable to our audiences. We have the responsibility to project something that others can grab hold of and say, I identify with you. That makes sense to me. Or like in Kevin's case, I want to be like that person, right? And it sounds so simple, but we ignore it so much of the time. I mean, think of it from our earliest stages in childhood, going to school, right? Kindergarten, we sit in a circle and the teacher says, everybody introduce yourself. And what do you like to do when you're not at school? Well, the moment that you first open your mouth in that setting, you're starting to create your brand to those other kids in your classroom and to the teacher. I like baseball, or I like to help my dad cook. He barbecues on the weekend, and someday when I grow up, I want to be a chef, right? So people are starting to gather things about you, right? And then you go out in the playground, and the kid who said, hey, I like baseball, now you're playing baseball. And the kid who just hits home run after home run, or always gets a base hit, or really knows how to throw and catch, the other kids are looking and going, wow, when it's time to pick teams, I want that person on my team because that person really knows how to contribute, right? So we become known for the things that we offer. What is my value proposition? I'm a kid who can really hit or throw or catch, right? And so, in that little scenario, the teacher helped facilitate everybody, Johnny, introduce yourself. And we tell our story, or we give a little tidbit. And this gets back to Kevin's point, right? That there's this inner working of all these complex environments. And we get a piece here and a piece here and a piece here. And the truth is, we form our brand perceptions over time, like a jigsaw puzzle. We find, oh, here's a piece that fits. And we, as complex human beings, are able to store the progress on the jigsaw puzzle for almost everybody we need, up to maybe 20 or 30 people in our lives and maybe 20 or 30 brands, right? We see, oh, here's the picture I have of Johnny, right? I started forming this in kindergarten, and I learned that first year he can really throw the baseball. 2 years later, in second grade, I learned that he has empathy. The little girl dropped her books in the hallway, and he stopped what he was doing. He picked them up. He has compassion. Or, when he went to the lunchroom, he really took a lot more food than he probably needed to. Johnny is a big eater. We start to form these impressions, but at the end of the day, who do I want to be like? Who do I want to call best friend? Right? Who do I want to choose to come into kind of the inner sanctum of my consciousness and my identity? Because, when I hold up this device with the big apple on the back, this is part of my identity. I chose this instead of Android, right? And, these artifacts and these elements and these things we gather around ourselves, we get to a place, maybe, to continue with the analogy, we get into high school and suddenly there's a lot of fear. I'm going to meet a lot of new kids. Are they going to like me? You know what my best strategy is? Just keep my head down, don't say anything, and maybe nobody will notice, right? They won't reject me, right? That's some people, probably the majority of people, is just keep a low profile, whether it's going into high school or starting a new job and meeting all the people, or going out there to a networking event and saying, hey, I'm a copywriter. Will you hire me to work on your team? Or I'm a videographer, or I'm a Webflow developer, right? You have something to offer, but there's something in us that holds back and says, I don't want to take the risk of really putting myself out there and confronting people with my identity. And really in business, the people who are going to win in this current digital ecosystem, they don't just have the skills and the abilities, but they're able to kind of reach out there into the environment, the digital environment, and the physical environment, and kind of the composition of both together. They're able to get out there and say, here I am, a relatable person. Here's a way for me to relate to you. One of the things that people say that I do a good job at is meeting new people at networking events or at huge conferences. And I don't have anything fake that I do that makes me meet people easily. But what I do is I use a thing that I really like and I really enjoy, and it's really sincere. And I compliment people on their shoes, on their glasses, on their accessories. Those are great shoes. I love your glasses. And why? Because it's something that's real to me. I love talking about that stuff, right? And it just breaks down a natural barrier. It immediately makes me relatable. Oh, you're a person who identifies with me. Oh, you're somebody I can talk to and be safe with. So, in the environment, you don't have 30 people on your team, but you have to make an impression about your value proposition to the people that you need to say yes to you in your business. Because really, that's what we're doing. We're out there, we're putting ourselves out there with whatever it is we're doing. And we're asking people to say yes to what it is we're offering. And for them to say yes to what it is we're offering, they need to have the connection that Kevin was talking about. They need to feel something. Social identification, emotional identification, ideological identification. That's a big one these days, although ideological identification can be a point of division too. So it can be a little bit risky to do that. But how do I present it, what I do, and differentiate it amongst the competitive field? I think taking responsibility for being the person who's going to say, I'm going to be out here, I'm going to make myself accessible. I'm going to understand enough about my audience to find connection points where we can relate to one another, to where we mutually feel safe enough to get to know each other enough to start the process of moving towards the ultimate goal, which is to do business together, right? And just like in dating or anything else, it's not just one thing, it's a series of things that happens in order. It unfolds like a story. There's a beginning, a middle, and hopefully not an end. A beginning, middle, end of an iteration, and then the next and the next and the next. So I think the biggest advice that, in terms of my reaction to Kevin's presentation is that, if you really break down the components of what brand storytelling is, it doesn't matter if you're a solopreneur or part of a massive, entity. We have to understand our audience. We have to understand what it is that they relate to and what it is they like to consume. Think about it this way. Think about it like when you're presenting something to your audience, really what you're presenting is something for them to consume. They're consumers, and we're consumers of information. So think about it like you're preparing an information sandwich for your audience to eat. Well, are you just going to cook up whatever sandwich and give it to oh, great hamburger, I'm a vegetarian, thank you. Or you know what, that sesame chicken sandwich looks beautiful, but I have a peanut allergy, I can't eat it. But what we do instead is, if you're having a dinner party or you're having somebody come to dinner, what is it you like to eat? You don't like seafood? Great, won't serve that. What do you like to eat? Okay, you eat this, this, and this. You like spicy food? Great. Now you know something. Now you have a connection point. Now you can take responsibility to create an information sandwich that they are going to, drool over and want to consume. And if you're the person who delivers something that's like, wow, that was great, then your brand in their mind is building trust. Just like the kid who can throw the ball or run really fast or hit the ball, you're the person who can deliver a moment of meaning. You're the person who can be relatable and give me something safe I can rely on to create my website or to join my team as a creative director or whatever the case may be. So brand storytelling for anyone on this call, because we're all kind of in the same basic position, right? We're all individuals, we're all part of something else, and it is our responsibility to package ourselves in a way that's relatable, to present ourselves in a way that our audience is readily able to consume and appreciate, and to take the necessary steps on an ongoing basis to draw them nearer and nearer and nearer to us. And what will happen is, you as a brand, in their mind, like that jigsaw puzzle they're carrying around, piece after piece after piece will fall in place. And not only is it a picture that's becoming more progressively complete, but it's becoming progressively complete and they like the picture they're seeing. They can relate to it, they can identify with it, they enjoy it, and they want to keep filling in the pieces. That's our job as branders, people branding ourselves, as any brand we're associated with, any client, is understand the audience, look at the value proposition, tell a story that makes sense, it's relatable, and take them by the hand and lead them into something that they're going to appreciate. We each have to take responsibility. We can't be like the scared kid going into high school on day one who just doesn't, I don't want anybody to notice me. I'm just going to somehow make it through. We need to be the person out there opening doors for people, making other people feel like it's okay and safe to be there. Hey, my name's John. Welcome to high school. Yeah, this is my first day too, but I at least wanted to do something I could do. So each of us has that responsibility. We need to take that responsibility. This is why they don't let me run webinars, because I go off one question and 30 minutes later. So
That was great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay,
folks,
well,
Go ahead, Rachel.
That's cool. I think we were about to say the same thing, which is we're well over time, and we really, really appreciate everyone who's hung out with us right to the end here. But we certainly will let you go and conclude Lenker's episode 1 of the marketing series, which will be moving forward. Please do follow the LinkedIn page for LENKER Consulting to get notifications of future events. We hope that maybe a few of you will see you there. And we will be recording this and publishing that as well if anyone wants to dip back in or share that with anybody else. So definitely thank you everybody for coming here today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Kevin, for the great presentation. Thank you, John, for that very long answer. No, for the profound discussion around brand, because John cares about brand more than anybody else I know in my life, as you can possibly tell. And so it's really it's a privilege to be able to talk to everybody about it today, and we hope we got something great from it.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.